So, Matthew chapter 14. We were on Jesus walking on the water previously, and now we're on Peter walking on the water. They said, for context, verse 26, but when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, it is a ghost. And they cried out in fear, but immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, take heart, it is I, do not be afraid. Fear not, I am, ego eimi, speaking to his divinity. And Peter answered him with this. He answered him with an instruction to Jesus. Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. He said, come. He did not correct Peter for his grammar. He did not correct Peter for his brashness. He did not correct Peter for his design of entering a room mouth first. Because Peter enters a room mouth first, just like any prophet will usually enter a room mouth first. He just said, come. So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. So next time you think you're perfect, try walking on water, you can respond, Peter was not perfect, was he? He was the only one that got out and walked. He worked at it, and he tried. He just did. Oh, I'm walking on the water. Imagine that. He came to Jesus. Here's the kicker verse right here. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out.
Was it the wind or was it in the wind?
He saw the wind. The wind was evidently rooted in something that Peter was able to see that Peter did not like.
That's why I asked the question.
The nature of the wind. So,
have you looked at the Greek there?
If I looked at the Greek there...
Yeah, I was curious if this was a translation issue.
I have not looked at the Greek there. I will, however, look at the Greek. Yeah, let's see. Alright, back in a moment. Honey, do you have anything to say while I'm gone?
Sure. Whatever it was that distracted Peter, Peter was distracted. He had his eyes on Jesus. I'm sure he was afraid. It was a bad storm. The winds were all, the waves were all choppy and whatever. It's not like it was a nice, glassy, calm sea. And his eyes were on Jesus, and he got out of the boat and he walked on the water. And then something pulled his attention away, broke his gaze. Okay? And that's when he started to stumble. It's really important, especially when you're taking steps of faith, walking toward whatever God has for you. The enemy is going to put distractions into your path to try to get your eyes off of what you're going toward. And they're going to loom large, and they're going to seem more real than what God is saying to you, but it's an illusion and a lie. Okay? So be careful. When you're walking towards something God has for you, there's going to be things to get you off the track. So you've got to be fiercely intentional to keep taking those steps with your eyes on God. That's why it's really important, especially when you're walking towards something, a birthright, a calling, whatever God's spoken to you, a promise, write it down. Because it's really easy for your mind to take off with it and say, oh, this thing that seems more real, that's distracting me, is more real than what God said to me, therefore I'm going to go that path. And then that leads down to regret, because you realize later, I got my eyes off of the Lord, I started to sink, I fell off the path, and that path may no longer be available. You may not be able to back up and go on that path again. So once you're on that path, it's really important to stay intentional about being on that path. And it's hard. It's really hard sometimes. I've done it, and a couple times I've successfully walked the path, and other times he successfully derailed me. Just being honest. I've walked it both ways, and the path of regret is a bitter, bitter path. it's like a path of death, because you know that a piece of your calling, a piece of what God had for you is now dead. And that's a really hard thing to handle. There's grace, there's forgiveness. He'll put you on a different path, but you lose that. Sometimes there's no redemption. Go ahead. For that piece.
The Greek there says strong winds.
Okay.
Anemos ischiros. They did not translate ischiros.
I wonder if it was like a water spout or something, because you can see the wind in a.
It may have been that. Okay. And that could have been a Leviathan.
That could have been like a big wave.
That's why I
Like
asked
a really
what
big
was
wave.
in the wind.
Yeah, could have been a Leviathan.
The issue there was the wind was part with it. So whether or not it was not something you could separate from the wind. But I get what you're saying, Lily. Yes. Okay. So when he saw the strong wind, he was afraid. When he saw whatever it was that was there, that was wind and yet beyond the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out,
This tool was amazing.
Lord, save me. Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? So Jesus corrected the person that walked on the water. And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, Truly you are the Son of God. So, beating winds and waves. Peter says, come out. Jesus says, come. Peter comes. He successfully walks on the water. Water spout, tornado, Leviathan, whatever it was, windstorm, nasty storm. He sinks. Jesus corrects him. Then they get in the boat. Then after they get in the boat, no more storm. And they knew the natural course of these storms, and so they knew that, wait a minute, we got something going on here. It's very important when we are engaged in this, that when we engage in trouble, that we remember that Jesus is the Son of God. That single confession can get us out of a whole lot of mess. That single acknowledgement can get us out of a whole lot of mess, being intimately acquainted with his sonship to the Father. And by extension, him teaching us a lot about our sonship with the Father. So, as Jesus is sending us out, we are to recognize who he is sending out. He is not sending out slaves to make subjects for the kingdom. He is sending out sons. If you're going to send, royalty is not going to send out a slave who isn't aware of their identity to bring other people into the kingdom, because they're not interested in slavery. He's going to send out someone like himself, a son. Royalty, to bring people into a kingdom, not an empire. A kingdom is made of sons. He is the sovereign, but there's this dynamic of royalty that is not often dealt with. And we need to recognize that we're more than just merely sinners. So, those are just some thoughts.
That's good.
And y'all be blessed. We love you.